You know, hacking your Glock is really nothing new to any Glock enthusiast. Change your sights, upgrade your trigger, mill your slide, stipple your grip, add a magwell, add a compensator, the list goes on. But with the Gen 5, everything changed. So you're probably wondering, like, well, what the heck kind of hacks do you have for Gen 5 today? Well, I discovered something about the Gen 5s over the past year or so that I've owned them. You can do hacks with the Gen 5s that you can't do with any other generation of Glock. So I remember when the Gen 5s came out, I didn't really jump on the bandwagon immediately because I wanted to see if they had any like problems or anything. And I really wanted other people to really have to deal with those problems before I did. So I waited a little bit. But ultimately I ended up buying a Gen 5 Glock 19, and I have since bought four or five other Gen 5s as well, including the 17 and 19 MOS, as well as one in Flat Dark Earth. I just love them so much. And I remember like the backlash people had. They said, hey, they didn't improve anything. They're not drastically different. At first I thought the same thing. I was like, yeah, they're not that much different than any other Glock. But then when you take them apart and you start really examining them, you start seeing a bunch of stuff that's drastically different. So basically what that means is the hacks that we used to do to our Gen 3s and Gen 4s can now be done on our Gen 5s, but they're a lot easier and a lot cheaper. So hack number one, using an older generation slide on the Gen 5 frame. You've always been able to take Gen 3 slides and put them on Gen 4 frames. You can get these little slide filler adapters. They're not necessary, but they help fill in the little gap from the guide rod. One of the enhancements that the Gen 5s have is they now have ambidextrous slide lock slide release. Up until now, there haven't really been any Gen 5 slides that you could buy aftermarket. There is, and we're gonna cover those here in a minute. But let's just say, for example, you got a sexy Gen 3 laying around in your arsenal and you're like, dude, I would love to put this slide on a Gen 5 frame. Downside is you're gonna need a cutout on your slide right up here for that ambidextrous slide lock slide release. So how do we fix it? To make this happen, all we gotta do is make sure your gun is clear, take off your Gen 3 or Gen 4 slide. We're gonna take this slide stop slide release and we're just gonna punch it out real quick. And we're gonna take our slide stop slide release out. Then we're gonna take our Gen 5, make sure it's clear. We're gonna take off this slide. Then we're gonna punch out this pin. We're gonna take out our dual slide stop slide release. We're gonna replace that with our single slide stop slide release. And then we're gonna replace our pin. After we have that complete, now we need to change the back plate to a Gen 5 back plate. On this side, we have the Gen 3, Gen 4 back plate. On the right side, we have the Gen 5. You'll notice that there is more clearance on this right-hand side on the Gen 5 than there is on the Gen 3, Gen 4. These will work on all generations. These won't work on Gen 5. So we just get that installed, and then we just put it right here onto our Gen 5 frame. Now, if you have a Gen 3, you're gonna notice this gap right here. Functionally, it's gonna work perfect. There's nothing wrong with the gap, but if it bothers you, you can get these little adapters right here and they essentially just fill in that gap. I'll put links down below. It just fits right here. And then we just take our guide rod, put it in behind it, put our slide back on, and now our gap is filled in. You only need two things. You just need a Gen 5 backplate and you just need a Gen 3 or Gen 4 single-sided slide stop slide release and you're good to go. Functions perfectly, no problems shooting it or anything. Now, one of the other enhancements that the Gen 5 had over the Gen 3 and Gen 4 was the OEM trigger was drastically better, a heck of a lot better. Every single one of my Gen 5s pulls at about 4.5 to 5 pounds instead of the 5.5 to 6 pounds, and they're a lot smoother and they're not quite as spongy as they used to be thanks to an upgraded safety plunger. But nonetheless, let's say you bought a Gen 5 and you're like, dude, I want to throw an aftermarket trigger in it, but I'm strapped for cash, but I have some Gen 3 and Gen 4 triggers laying around. Can I put those in? In order to put a Gen 4, an older trigger into a newer frame, you just need one thing, a Gen 4 trigger housing. It doesn't matter if the trigger bar is Gen 3 or Gen 4, they both work, and the connectors are not generation specific. Even with Gen 5s, you can use Gen 3 and Gen 4 connectors. As long as you have this housing, you just take it and put it into your Gen 5 frame. So on the Gen 5 triggers, there's clearance on the outside of the trigger bar here for the ambidextrous slide stop slide release. With this one, that's not gonna work. Therefore, we're just gonna use a single slide stop slide release, put our locking block back into place. We're gonna put our slide stop slide release into place, put our pins back into it, and then we can put our slide back on it. If you're using the Gen 5 slide, because the plungers are different on the Gen 5 and then they are on the Gen 4, you're gonna get a smoother trigger pull, even if you're using an older trigger and a newer gun. I actually discovered that trick from my buddy at Tactical Pontoon a long time ago. He said he was coming out with these Gen 5 triggers and he sent me a trigger and I'm like, this isn't Gen 5? And he's like, yeah, but I like them better. And I was like, oh, okay. Tried it, works perfectly. Now, hack number 3, this is probably one of my favorite hacks, the long slide method. So back in the olden days, if you wanted the Glock 19 long, you had to essentially go get a Glock 19 long slide and a Glock 19 long barrel. Why? Before the Gen 5s came out, the Glock 17 and the Glock 19 had different dimensions on the lugs on the barrel. So theoretically, you could use a Glock 17 slide on a Glock 19 frame, but if you did, your barrel was gonna get jammed onto the locking block and you probably wouldn't get that slide off of that frame. So don't ever try that. There was the other problem of even if you had a Glock 19 long barrel, you still couldn't use the Glock 17 slide because the slide lock slide release position was different. Well, with Gen 5s, that's all changed now. The long slide method is probably the easiest one of all. If you're wanting to put a Glock 17 slide onto a Glock 19 frame, you simply just take off your Glock 17 slide of your one Gen 5, put it onto the Gen 5 frame, and you're good to go. Also, it still locks open on the last round. There is one problem here. We got this little spring showing. In order to fix that, we got to take these little guys right here. This is a Gen 4 to Gen 4 slide adapter. That's the one that I got. I'll throw a link below for these. This one has been Cerakoted, but spray paint works too. Take your guide rod out like this. We take our adapter. It's kind of angled in the corners. Those goes toward the front. I just put it in right there, slide it forward, put our guide rod into place, and it works just like so. Very beautiful, love it to death. You know, once I did that, I kind of got to wondering another question. Can I do it with the Glock 26 with a Glock 19 frame? Well, I don't have a Gen 5 Glock 26, but one thing I discovered about Polymer 80s last year, for whatever reason, on the Gen 3 Glock 26 frames, they're actually using the Gen 4 recoil system. As you can see here on the right, we have the Gen 3 recoil system on all other models, but for some reason, the 26 has a Gen 4. So theoretically, that means we can fit a Gen 5 frame onto here. And it does go into place. That's crazy. There you got a Glock 26 long. There is one little issue with this. So when I started putting this video together, I thought that the Glock 26 one was gonna be viable, but it's not. I'll show you in a second. What are the benefits to this? Well, the main benefits are you still retain your short grip so you can conceal it just as easily as you can with a standard Glock 19, but then you get the added sight radius, which you don't really need if you got a red dot, but you get a longer barrel, which means you get higher muzzle velocities, which is always good when you're trying to defend yourself. So I definitely love Glock 19 longs. I've been a fan of them ever since I built this one that came out from Brownells. I'll include a link to this video down below because I actually really enjoy this slide. It's a softer shooting gun, even though you don't need a softer shooting gun when it's chambered in 9mm, but nonetheless, any benefit is better than nothing. Now with the Glock 26, like I mentioned, I don't think this is gonna be a viable option, and let me show you why. And I could be wrong about this. I have not test fired this one, but because we have a slide lock slide release over here on this side, I noticed that the rails kind of want to lift off right about here. See what I mean? See how that lifts up right there? I could foresee that not being reliable, but that could be because I'm using a Polymer 80 frame instead of a Gen 5 Glock 26 frame because I don't have a Gen 5 Glock 26 as of yet. I'll get one though, then I'll update you guys on whether or not this method works. But that got me to thinking, what if you could take a Glock 17 frame, put the Glock 19 slide on it, but because it's compensated, it would be like a little bit shorter. Downside to this, it doesn't work. It doesn't retract far enough for the slide stop slide release to engage. Therefore, it's just not gonna work. So one of the biggest flaws to the Gen 5 system to date, it has to be this half moon cutout on the front. And this little half moon cutout was basically an homage to the Gen 2 Glocks. Apparently, I never had a Gen 2, but apparently the Gen 2 ones had this half moon cutout. And so what Glock's claim to fame with this was, okay, if you got to strip a mag, now you have a place to put your fingers so you can yank the mag out. And everyone's like, yeah, but we already have the back portion here so we can get the mag out. You know, it does give you extra grip, but for some people, including myself, this little ridges right here, they will cut the crap out of your pinky under recoil. Even more so than that, you'll notice that there isn't a front lip on the front of it. Okay, so when you are under recoil, your hand starts to slide down. So there's 2 fixes for this, maybe 3. One is really dirt cheap, one's not so cheap, and one's a little bit more expensive. I'll start with the cheapest option and we'll work our way up. Cheapest option, base plates for your Glock mags. These are these Pierce extensions. This might not be a secret for a lot of you, but I know from the comments on all my Gen 5 videos, people are still asking about this, so maybe it is kind of a secret to a lot of people. When you put it into your gun, it adds that lip for you. Now the downside to this is it is attached to the magazine. So your magazine does have a little bit of wobble when you are shooting it, but it totally eliminates the aggravation that that cutout adds. And then it also gives you more confidence in your grip when you're shooting it because your pinky isn't sliding off the bottom of the grip. The other con to this though is you're like me and you just throw a bunch of mags in the range bag and go to the range. Well, if you have these on there, it's not gonna work with your other Glocks. It'll only work with the ones with the half moon cutout, which sucks. Now, rumor has it, and I saw this on Instagram the other day, someone went to the gun store, bought a standard Gen 5 Glock 19, and it had the same frame as the MOS. So maybe Glock is slowly phasing out the half moon cutout for the Gen 5s, which I think is the best move they could have ever made. Now, the next option isn't as cheap, but it's not crazy expensive. Always can add a magwell. Now this one is made by Zev Technologies. I have like 3 or 4 of these. Recently, another company came out with some magwells for the Gen 5s. They're basically the same thing. I'll make sure to link to both of them if you follow the first link in the description. For example, this gray frame definitely has that half moon cutout, but this adds a really nice ledge for your pinky. I feel so much more confident when I'm shooting when I have a ledge for my pinky. And part of that is 1, I can mitigate recoil better, but 2, it allows me to press against this ledge and push up with my knuckles, getting a higher grip and just making me more accurate in general. Now, the most expensive option is, and this is probably my favorite option, just buy an MOS if you don't already have a Gen 5. Whether it's the 17, the 19, or the 34, none of them have that front cutout. They are about $80-ish more. But you do get the option to add red dots of whichever red dot your little heart desires to them, and you get the added benefit of having front serrations on them. There's really nothing that needs to be done to the MOS line, so it is the most expensive option, but I'll have links to where you can get these at dealer pricing if that's something you're interested in. Just follow the link down below. I'll have a little bonus hack about the MOS line here in a second. So earlier we talked about putting, older generation slides onto the Gen 5 frame, but can you take the Gen 5 slides and put them onto a Gen 4 frame? They most definitely can't be put onto a Gen 3 frame unless you're just really good with a mill. And that's because of the cutout on the guide rod is way more narrow and its slide just won't go on. Let's say, for example, you have a Gen 4 frame that is nice and stippled up, and maybe you bought a Gen 5 and you're like, dude, I really just don't want to send off my frame again and get it all re-stippled. Or maybe you have one of these Nomad aftermarket frames. I've really been loving these frames the past almost a year now, shooting the crap out of it. It's a Gen 4 frame. It's 100%. It's not like an 80% frame. It's already got the pre-texture and everything in the undercut. What's cool about it, you can just take your Gen 5 slide and it goes right on. And the coolest part about it is it automatically locks open. There's no modifications needed because you just have the single slide stop slide release on this gun. So going back to about the half moon cutout, let's say you got a Gen 5 and you're like, dude, I just hate the freaking cutout. I don't want to get a magwell. I don't want to get the Pierce extensions, and I don't want to go shell out the money for an MOS. Gen 5 slides work on them perfectly. No issues with it locking open or anything like that. Trigger, Everything functions perfectly. I am very tempted to carry it like this. I just got to get a holster that fits this frame. On second thought, let me try something real quick. Bonus hack. So typically with this holster, this one's from Redline Concealment, good friend of mine, one of the very first holster I ever reviewed, not this particular one, but from his company. And then this one also fits my Tier 1 concealed, but if you get a light bearing holster, this one is made for the Enforce APLC. It's also got the opened end for the compensator and clearance for the red dot. You can see it fits perfectly snug. That is an awesome hack. So if you do get one of these Nomad Defense frames, you can use them with your holster, given that your holster is a light bearing holster and you use the same exact light. Now we got to come to the part of the video that might render most of these hacks useless. Okay, Gen 5 slides are now here. Aftermarket Gen 5 slides. They're available in 2 different flavors. You got the Gunsmith Ready Blanks, which are just square blocky things. You order them, then you send them off to the slide company of your choice and have them colored to your preferences and do what you do, boo. And then there's option number 2. And that is going to be a custom slide Cerakoted to your preference. The blank one is about $189.99, and I think the custom one is $299 or something like that. I'll throw links below so you can check the current pricing on them just in case they throw a sale or something like that. I don't have my hands on one of those slides yet, so I can't really attest to the performance of them, but I can tell you based on all the other slides that I've ever gotten from the same people, like this sleeper build that we did about a year ago, I'm gonna just go ahead and say they're good to go. Now there are more benefits to the Gen 5 specific slides than just having the ambidextrous slide lock, slide release. The other benefit to the Gen 5 slides over the Gen 4 and Gen 3 is the striker and the striker hull. On the Gen 3 and Gen 4, the striker is more of a flat design, and on the Gen 5s, it's more of a rounded design. So if you get one of these Gen 5 slides, you've got to use a Gen 5 firing pin and internals because of that new design. Bonus hack number 2. So with the Glock MOS, if you've ever played with these, this is the Holosun 507C. On the Holosuns, it has the same exact footprint as the Trijicon RMR, yet they're like a lot cheaper, but they seem to be running just as good so far after about 8 or 9 months of testing. But if you'll notice here, notice that gap that's between the rear sight and then between the slide on the front here as well. That bothers a lot of people. I started looking for a solution and I got this filler plate right here. Basically what it does is it moves your red dot backwards a little bit and then it fills in the gap in the front here and it locks down really nicely. I'll throw a link below to these. These are absolutely a must-have for any MOS system. I understand why people are anal about it. It doesn't affect the functionality, at least for me so far. Nothing's come loose given that you Loctite it correctly. But it is a cool little hack to have. So that's my 5 secret Glock hacks. If you know of some other Gen 5 specific hacks that I didn't mention in this video, just throw them down in the comments section. But until next time, guys, I love you. You guys stay sexy.